It'll be open all day tomorrow, starting at 7 a.m. Quite wonderful. And just be here, open. Someone will always be here during the day. It'll be open if you just want to come and sit. There's a lot of centers of faith centers, churches and synagogues and mosques and stuff. Open their doors now with the fact that the war has started, to mark the beginning, to bring people together. And so if that's something you'd like to do tomorrow, you know that the place is open, and you come and sit and meditate. And in the evening we'll have our gathering as a community, bigger gathering. Now in terms of the class, one thing that, building on what we talked about a little bit last week and the week before, the first chant is preparing for one's death. Homage to the perhaps Buddha, well before the refuges, and the precepts. Death seems to be going for refuge and taking the precepts. There are all kinds of resources, a lot of resources out there, a lot of books on the whole topic of death and dying, around the time of death, places you can get support. It's very easy to find now, these kinds of things, much more than it was 25 years ago. At any point where a Buddhist might feel a need to... there's this book called the... Recommit or be reminded. Beneficiary book, which is was put together as a way of helping people prepare for all the kind of legal, financial, medical things you want to have well planned ahead of times of crisis and difficulty. And the book's very interesting because it's mostly, from what I understand from the description, it's one of the first things they do is a whole bunch of questions that you want to answer. So rather than telling you and giving you, so for now, just listen. As I do. Just ask all these questions, and you have to kind of, I guess, find out for yourself. And some of them, I imagine, are pretty practical and straightforward. What's your bank account number? And others are, probably much more, soul-searching, deep questions about what would you like at that point, as you're dying or after you're dead. So there's this order form for it here. And so if you want to look at this at least, or order it, it should be very interesting, I think, to do that. Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo. So last week we came up to the point of someone dying, and then the question is, what do you do after that? So if you're someone who's around to take care of someone who's died, what do you do in a Buddhist tradition for someone who's died? Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami. If you ask what is the Buddhist thing to do, there are so many different Buddhists that there's so many different possibilities of what you can do. And then even within Theravada Buddhism itself, there's various things that people do with the body afterwards. Sometimes the body is whisked off very quickly, and as quickly as they can, they bury the body or cremate the body. And sometimes the body is left in state for a long time. You leave it alone for a long time. And if it's some very important person in Thailand, they might leave the body in state for as much as a year. There's all kinds of reasons why they might leave the body kind of someplace without doing anything, not doing any final thing with the body. There's all kinds of things to do, and the Buddha didn't actually give any instructions for how to take care of. He gave instructions for how to take care of his dead body, but he very clearly used the model of a great emperor. And so most of us are not great emperors, so it's not really appropriate, that kind of burial. So besides that, there's no instructions. And what's happened historically, I apologize that I said this last time, is that as Buddhism has gone through the different cultures of Asia, they have, Buddhism has assimilated or adopted many of the local customs around death and dying, as it seemed appropriate, as it seemed helpful. And did I say this last time? I said this? Okay. Sometimes I talk so much it's hard to know what I said, where, when, and how. And I apologize. I undertake the training. And of not so, adopted, different practices that are useful from different cultures, in different cultures. So different cultures have different worldviews, different understandings of what a self is. I undertake the training. Understandings of what it means to be in relationship to other people. And so they have different rituals and practices because of who they are. of not misusing
And that means that for us also,
sexuality.
we're unique. Western psyche is its
I
own
undertake
kind of
the
psyche.
training
Or
to
many
abstain from
psyches,
using
depending on the background we
mind-altering
have,
substances or
families,
activities.
ethnic, religious, whatever. And so different things, different rituals, different ways of doing it. If you're Irish, it might be the best thing you could do is you get a massage table and put the body out there on the sidewalk and bring out the bear and have a party, which is what they do sometimes, I've been told. I don't know, I haven't seen that in Ireland myself, but I've been told that it's quite interesting.
This is what should be done
and
by one who
if
is
you're
skilled in goodness
other traditions, it's very sober,
and who knows
somber.
the path of peace.
Many different ways of doing it.
Let them be
And,
able and upright, straightforward and gentle.
Did I tell
in
a story
speech,
here last Wednesday
humble
about
and
the
not conceited,
Amazon?
contented and easily
Maybe I said it on
satisfied,
Friday, right? On Friday. So people on
unburdened
Friday,
with
you didn't hear
duties and
last
frugal in their
Wednesday?
ways.
So it's an example of some of the
peaceful
customs,
and
how different they can
calm
be.
and
This is not a Buddhist
wise
one,
and
but
skillful.
many years ago I had the opportunity
Not
to go
proud
sailing up
and demanding in nature.
one of the tributaries.
Let them not do the
not
slightest
tributary, I guess,
thing
but one of the
that the wise would
side
later
rivers,
reprove,
side shoots of the
wishing
Amazon
in gladness
French
and in
Guiana.
safety.
And
May all beings be
kind
at
of
ease.
away from the Atlantic.
Whatever
French
living
Guiana is
beings there
quite
may be,
protected. The Native American
whether they are
Indians who live
weak
there.
or strong,
And the
omitting
cultures are quite
none,
undisturbed for the most
the
part.
great or the
And we went to a
mighty,
place where
medium,
mostly,
short, or small,
so-called
the seen and the
certainly people
unseen,
from America, so-called
those living
civilized
near
people,
and far away,
don't usually go.
those born and to be born.
And there we found
May all
people
beings
called the
be at
Boni.
ease.
And they're actually
Let
Africans
none
who
deceive
were
another,
enslaved
or despise any being in
and
any
brought
state.
to South America. I think
Let none
to
through
Suriname by
anger
the
or
Dutch.
ill will
And then
wish
they
harm
escaped
upon
in the
another.
first generation. So
Even
the
as a
people who had been
mother
captured
protects
in
with her
Africa,
life
they
her
escaped from
child,
slavery.
her only child.
And so all their
So
culture
with
was
a
intact in their
boundless
hands.
heart should one cherish
And
all living
they went into the
beings,
jungles and stayed there
radiating
for 200-300
kindness
years.
over the entire
And
world,
in some ways, they're more African
spreading
than some of
upwards
the
to the skies
people nowadays in
and
Africa
downwards
because
to
they're
the
so
depths,
isolated, like an island.
outwards and unbounded,
And we came into
freed
this
from
little
hate and
village
ill will, whether
where this woman
standing
had
or
died
walking,
maybe that day.
seated or lying
And we
down,
came just when they were
free
building
from drowsiness.
her coffin. And we
One
could
should
watch the
sustain
coffin
this
being built around her
recollection.
body.
This is said to be the sublime
we explained
abiding,
that that evening there was going to be
by not holding to
festivities.
fixed
Funeral
views.
festivities.
The
So we stayed
pure-hearted
around.
one,
And when
clarity of
nightfall
vision,
came, they were going to
being
carry the
freed
coffin
from all
of this
sense
woman
desires,
into
is not born again
this
into this
ceremonial
world.
hall, or I don't know, ceremonial dance hall, this kind of center of the village, that had no walls, just had thatched roof and posts holding it up.
The next one
But there was
is
an entryway. And there were 6 men
adopted
carrying
from the Tibetan Book of
coffin.
the Dead.
And then they came to
It was
the
adopted
entryway
by
to this hall.
Vipassana teachers in
There was a man
1980s,
blocking the way.
1980s.
And when they tried to
be used
enter with a coffin,
to help
he
people
started
in
pushing
their
the coffin
dying.
away and beating
To be
on it,
read
and
while they're
yelling
dying.
it. As far as I could, the sound of the language was he was cursing at this coffin, banging it and
Remember
pushing
the
it away,
clear light.
refusing letting it in. This
The
went
pure,
on for a
clear,
little while,
white light
and then suddenly he stopped.
from which everything in the
and then
universe
he took
comes,
the place of one of the other
to
coffin
which
bearers.
everything in the
And
universe
the other coffin bearer
returns.
came and took his place.
The
He did the
original
same thing.
nature of your
Prevented
own
the coffin
mind,
from entering the ceremonial
the natural
place.
state of the universe,
And so
unmanifest.
finally there was enough of that. And they
Let
let
go
the coffin
into
in.
the clear light.
And then they had this party,
Trust
music
it.
and dancing all through the
Merge
night.
with it. It is
And
your own
the coffin
nature.
was right there.
It
as
is
part of
home.
And I
The
asked,
visions
what was that
you
about?
experience exist
And the
within your
explanation
consciousness.
was that the men
The
carrying the
forms they
coffin,
take
some of
are
the older
determined by your
men in the
past
village, they'd known this
attachments,
woman
your
all her
past
life. She was an old
desires,
woman when
your
she
past
died.
fears,
And
your
they
past
had
karma.
scores to settle with her.
These visions and
They had
thoughts
things
have
to
no
say,
reality
you know,
outside
things
your
that-
consciousness.
And before that
No
she could
matter
be
how
laid to rest,
frightening
before
some
they
of
could kind
them
of celebrate
may seem,
and have this
they
festivities,
cannot hurt
around
you.
her death, her life.
Just watch
They
them
had
pass
to,
through your consciousness.
They had to get it off their chest.
They will
and tell
all
her,
pass in
what had to be
time.
said.
No need to become involved with them. No need
So,
to become
all these different
attracted to the
customs.
beautiful
And
visions.
different cultures have
No
different
need
things
to
which
be
are useful.
repulsed by the frightening ones.
The Buddhist
No
contribution
need
to
to be
this
seduced or
is
excited by the sexual ones. No need to be attached to them
pointing
at
to
all.
what is spiritually most helpful.
Just let them pass.
And
If
what's
you
most
become
helpful
involved
is that
with these
which
visions,
helps people
You may have to
become
wonder
released
for a long time,
from
confused.
any kind of holding in their hearts and
Just
their minds.
just let them pass through
So
your
what is it
consciousness.
that's most helpful for that
like the
process
clouds
is the
passing
Buddhist
through
question.
an empty sky.
And in different cultures, there'll be different answers
Fundamentally,
for that.
they have no more reality
So,
than
there's
this.
so it shouldn't be under the assumption there's the
Remember
proper,
these
right
teachings.
Buddhist way to do it.
Remember the
There
clear
are very
light,
straight,
the
and
pure,
true Buddhist
bright,
things that you can do,
shining white light
and
of
which is
your own
beautiful
nature.
to do. And some of you
It
might
is
want to do it that way.
deathless.
But you don't have to feel like that's
if you can
this is
look
the way it has
into
to
the
be.
visions,
You're
you can
actually quite welcome
experience
to design
and
your own.
recognize that they are composed
your
of
own
the
funeral
same
if you
pure,
want.
clear white light
then,
as everything else in the universe.
It's easier for the people who survive to know what
No
to
matter
do.
where or how
Or if
far
one
you
of your
wander,
loved ones has
the
died,
light is only a split second,
you don't have to.
a half breath
you can
away.
Kind of,
It
find
is never
out,
too late
kind of
to
figure out what's best
recognize
for
the
you.
clear light.
Sometimes it's very hard to figure out on your own, especially if you don't have any background in this kind of event. And then, you can come to me or some other teacher or some other person who knows about these things and can help with the design or can decide themselves what's most useful.
Another passage that's sometimes read comes from the Zen
So
tradition.
after a person has died, and after you feel that, the person has died, as I said last week, there's some ambiguity in Buddhism, or ambiguity in life.
The way is perfect.
When death actually occurs.
Like vast space.
And so the idea that it actually
where there's no
occurs
lack
with the final
and no
breath,
excess.
maybe it's not so.
Awakening
Maybe
is to go
continues for a
beyond
while,
both emptiness as well as form.
There are meditative states.
All
where a
changes
person
in this
stops
empty
breathing.
world seem
And
real
so,
because of ignorance.
It's just
The great way is without limit, beyond the easy and
so it's
the
best
hard.
to kind of sense
Just
or
let
feel
go
your way
now
into
of the clinging
this,
mind.
the presence of the person.
And all things are
in
just
case,
as they
you
are.
have sensed the person still
In
there,
essence, nothing goes
beyond
or
the final
stays.
breath. You want to stay peaceful
To
and
seek
calm in the
great
room,
mind
best you
with
can.
a thinking mind
There's a lot of, if you feel like
is
you want to
certainly
have
a
to cry,
grave
grieve a lot,
mistake.
it's the suggestion in
If
Buddhism
mind
that
does
you
not
actually quietly leave
discriminate,
the room,
all
so you can
things
keep
are
the
as
room
they
peaceful
are,
and
as
calm,
one.
to help that person
When
who is
all
dying,
is seen with the mind
process
of
of dying or
equality, we return to our most intimate
And,
nature. When the mind is fully with the way,
but at some
all
point you might
ego-centered
feel,
striving
the
cease.
presence, the consciousness,
Doubts
the
and
life force
confusion
of something is
disappear.
gone.
And so
At
true
that point,
faith pervades our life. There's
Um,
no thing that clings to us,
there are various
nothing that is left behind.
views about
In this
is a
true
little bit hard for me
world
to
of
talk about
emptiness,
because
both self and other are no more.
do I represent just myself?
The way is
Or
beyond
do I
all
here to represent the
space,
Buddhist tradition?
all time.
If I represent the Buddhist tradition,
One
then how
instant
do I hold the different
in
views?
10,000
I
years.
know so much.
One
one of the
instant
problems
is
that people who study
10,000
a lot
years.
is it's hard
Not
to
only here,
know what's
not
true.
only elsewhere.
Truth
Truth is
if what
right
you're learning
before
is
your
from
very
texts and
eyes.
teachers and stuff, because
One thing is all things are one.
there's different teachers say different things, and
Know
different texts
this,
say different things.
and all is
So if you want
whole
to be a
and
fundamentalist,
complete.
you don't want to go shopping
When
around.
faith and the mind are not separate,
Stay with one thing.
all this very
So
reality
it's a little bit
is
hard,
beyond
so
all words.
so it's a little
all
bit hard for me to
thought.
know how to talk about all this.
For here,
Now, one of
there's
the
no
interesting
yesterday,
aspects of that Buddhist theory of rebirth
no tomorrow,
is that there's
and no today.
you can look at it from at least three different perspectives that all amount to probably doing basically the same thing. So the practices, the practices and the ways you'd relate to death and someone who's dying would be the same, regardless in which way you hold the Buddhist teaching of rebirth.
And the final one I'll
So the
read is
first
kind of a
way is that
dedication of
it's
merit,
literally true.
the sharing of blessings. It's
And
sometimes called.
most Buddhists believe that.
And a
It's
very
very clear.
important part of Buddhist practice is
The second
sharing
is
blessings,
that
one's
it's
benefits,
really a
one's
metaphoric
merit.
way of talking
And
about
this is
life
often
and death,
done,
and it happens moment by moment.
for a person as they're dying,
Which I talked about, I think, the
to
first
gladden
night.
their mind,
And the third way, which I
can
didn't talk
rejoice and
about,
be happy in
is that the whole
the
idea, whole
blessings.
description of
And it's also done after a
rebirth in
person has
Buddhism
died.
is
both for the person
mythological
who's died,
language.
for their
It's
benefit
it's
if they can hear it,
psychomythic
but also for the
language.
benefit of those
Meaning
people.
that it speaks to some
Anybody who hears
deep
it.
aspects of our psyche
To the memorial
that
service or
responds
funeral.
to ritual and to myths and to those kinds of stories. And it
Through the
sometimes gets
goodness
underneath
that
the
arises
radar
from my
of our
practice.
conscious rational mind.
May my spiritual teachers and guides of great
something
virtue,
as profound as death,
my mother, my father, and my relatives,
affects the mind in
the
deep,
sun
deep
and the
subconscious
moon,
ways, no
and all
relationship to
virtuous
it.
leaders of
And
the
so
world.
occasionally, or maybe
May
not
the
occasionally,
highest
maybe
gods and evil forces,
the
celestial
rational approach
beings,
is not going
guardian
to get
spirits
into
of
what's
the earth,
really going on in the psyche.
and the Lord of death,
And
may
and
those
sometimes
who are
the
friendly,
mythic
indifferent, or hostile,
descriptions, the mythic
may
rituals,
all beings receive the blessings
they might not
of
be
my
literally
life.
true,
May
but
they soon attain
they
the
address
threefold bliss
that part of the mind
and realize
which
the deathless.
responds to myths. It informs
Through
it,
the
it changes
goodness
it,
that
it heals
arises
it, and
from
things
my
like that.
practice, and through this act of sharing,
So how do
may
you
all
treat
desires and
someone
attachments
after they
quickly
die?
cease, and all harmful states
There's
of
one
mind
belief that
until
as
I
long
realize
as the body is
Nibbana.
still around,
In every
the
kind
being
of
who has
birth,
departed,
may I have
in
an
some
upright
form or other,
mind,
is still
with
around
mindfulness
you,
and
in
wisdom,
the vicinity,
austerity
somehow
and
present,
vigor.
somehow is able to tune
May the
in.
forces of delusion not take hold,
the person might
nor
not
weaken my
choose to tune in,
resolve. The
but that
Buddha is
capacity
my
to tune in
excellent
is still there.
refuge.
in which case
is
you
the
would
protection of the Dharma.
speak to it still and relate
The
to
solitary Buddha is my
it,
noble Lord,
as if,
the
they can hear
Sangha
you
my
and
supreme
say things that are
support.
helpful.
Through the supreme power of
Another
all
view
these,
is that
may darkness and
in Theravada Buddhism
delusion
is that
be
once
dispelled.
death has finally occurred, the final moment of death, that then that life force or the consciousness or whatever it is departs immediately, and instantly is reborn someplace else. And so that body then, it's a body. It's an inanimate object at this point, and you want to treat it respectfully.
And then finally,
in memory of the
very
person.
short chant,
but there's no need to be
which,
particularly concerned about.
It's sometimes called the
how you handle the body
Theravada
vis-a-vis what it's going to do for the
chant.
person who's passed away.
because
and
it's very intimately connected to
so there's these two
funerals,
different
memorial
views.
services.
And
But it's
what are you
actually
gonna do about
chanted
those two
in many
views, if
different
you share any of
occasions.
those views?
Great
I think it's a
happy
really
occasions,
intuitive, a very
all
personal
occasions.
thing.
It's a very
but in both
central
cases, whether
and important
you
chant.
it comes from almost the same. What you would do.
So one
of the first things that happens is that in the Buddhist tradition, you would do again some of these readings. You would probably, minimum would be you take refuge, go for refuge, with the idea that you're doing it for the person, with the idea that the person can hear it and then be inspired and helped.
All
and you would do
things are
the
impermanent.
precepts, which are so
They have the
centrally
nature of
important to
arising and passing away.
healthy karma.
Those who
And
see
maybe you'd
deeply,
read some of the other things.
those who realize deeply,
And if it's not helpful for the person who's departed because they
the
can't tune
calming,
in,
the peace
then it
of
certainly
these
is going to be helpful for
formations,
those
these
people who are
conditioned
left here, who
phenomena,
are present. So it's a useful thing to
will
do.
find
Having a
happiness.
ritual, having some chanting to do, helps stabilize everybody in the room. Helps create a sense of calm or concentration or presence or stability in the room. And it's very helpful. The Buddhist view is it's very helpful to maintain that peaceful, calm stability in a room after someone has died. And so chanting is one of those ways. Reading is some of those ways to do that. So we can't always be sure who's getting the benefit, but it's a very beneficial thing to do. A very particular Buddhist thing that's done at various points, it can be done right after the body, the person has died, and it can be done later also as we go along, is the ritual washing of the body. Now, practically, it's often very useful to wash the body.
So
and sometimes hospice workers will
those
do it
are
for
resources
you.
that are
Nurses will
available
do it for you.
for people
Because
as they're dying.
sometimes there's all
they're-
kinds of body fluids
they're
that get
dead.
released with the death.
Things that I use
It's nice to
when
clean
I
it
go
up so
visit
that
people who are dying.
it doesn't smell
people
too
who are
badly.
dead.
And there are also
but some
resources
people
that
find
can
it
be
very
very
helpful
helpful to do
Things
the
are
washing
chanted
of the
and
body
said.
as kind
Also,
of a ritual.
in times
It
like
can be a very
tonight.
loving thing to do. So,
And,
it's the last time you're going to be with
I don't
someone.
know if all of you
kind of massage them,
had the
wash
radio
them.
on when you were coming
Maybe
over
you
here
wash
today.
them with usually with
But
yogi
I
tea.
didn't know this until
Some
I
kind of
turned my
scented
radio
tea
on
or
at
something.
quarter after
Sometimes
7 to come
people
down
put
here.
something in it.
My car.
A little. I don't
And
know
I
what
heard,
it is. I don't remember right
President
now what
Bush
it is. Maybe some of you know.
basically
Something that
announced
helps
that the war had
close
started.
the pores.
So
And so that helps slow down the decay process or the
we
smelling
find
process
ourselves.
that might happen.
And,
But you wash the body.
It seems a little
And,
bit odd to be
and there's
talking
various
about
other things you
anything
might
else
do
relating
practically,
to
like
anything
putting
else
cotton
given
in
what's
some of the
happened.
orifices so things don't
We will
continue
have
coming out. And in some traditions, it's the women do the
A
washing.
gathering tomorrow evening
And
at 7 in order to somehow
nowadays,
hold
making those
the
kinds of
war,
distinctions
beginning of the
between
war
men's work
as
and
a
women's work
community.
is sometimes not appreciated.
And
but
Monday
sometimes
night
it
we
might
talked
still
about
be
this, and very
appropriate.
clearly we said
I'm
we
not
should
one to
continue with the
judge.
class.
If someone wants to say it's appropriate
Some people
for women to do it,
say we
not
should
for
continue
men.
the class
In that circumstance,
if war was declared.
I'm not going to, because the class seemed important.
The person who was most vocal
Go for
about
it.
the importance of continuing the class
Is not
but the
here
ritual
tonight.
washing of the body,
Perhaps doing it with candles,
who knows what that's
flowers.
about.
Sometimes it's very nice after a person has died to
And,
ritually place
so what do you all
flowers
feel like
around
doing?
the person.
You want me to
Maybe
just
on the
continue,
chest,
venture
flower
forth
on the
and
chest,
finish the
some
class,
flowers
or
around the
would you
head.
like to do something different?
Have some flowers lit.
Venture
To
forth?
create kind of a sacred environment for everyone who's
And
going to be
somehow
there.
it does seem appropriate.
And people will come.
Enough. Talking about
And
death.
it's another time
How
to
do
say
we respond
goodbye
to
to a
death?
person.
How are we with
When
death?
you're washing the body or after the person's died.
So
You
as
say,
we did
"Thanks
last
for
week,
well."
if you don't mind,
Hopefully you've had a chance to do that
I'd very much
before the
appreciate
person
if you'd
died.
all,
Kind of
especially in the chairs,
most
for a
all
while.
of you listen for a little
It's
bit.
often
You
very
come
nice to do it
closer.
afterwards.
So
It
it can also be very nice
for
to
my
do that
sake,
as part
I feel
of the
more
memorial service.
connected to you all.
And address the actual person, have a photograph of the person, have the ashes there if you have ashes, or have the body there if you have. Then it's more like a funeral, I guess. But actually address the person say goodbye or say what needs to be said. And so it can be actual washing, or it can be a ritual washing. And the ritual washing in Theravadan Buddhism entails pouring water over the person's hand. So you'd have a bowl perhaps under the hand. You hold the hand over the side of the bed, and you pour water over it. And part of what the tradition is as you're washing the hand, you're also asking the person for forgiveness. So, so part of the saying goodbye is asking the person for forgiveness for any ways that you might have harmed them. And I suppose then also offering forgiveness for any ways they might have harmed you. There is a tradition of sitting and meditating with the body. And I've done that with bodies. At the Zen Center, they usually would keep bodies for 3 days. In Theravadan Buddhism, there is no particular idea of how long to keep the body. And it'd be very nice to get the really straight answer from me. This is the way you do it. This is the truth. This is the. But I'm not capable of doing that because I don't know some of these answers. In terms of this is the way it is. But there is a custom, and I find it for some people, it's very beneficial. It's very profound, and feels very helpful for all concerned to sit and just meditate with the body, have the body there. And sometimes people will take turns, take shifts, so that someone's always there sitting with the body. And some people don't care for that so much. It's just enough, and they leave the body there, and maybe they'll go to sleep and leave the body alone at night, and then the next morning they be with the body a little bit. And some people like to sit near the body and just quietly reminisce about the person who's passed away. And I've seen that be quite a nice thing for people to do. But the particular Buddhist things is these very simple rituals, the washing of the hand, the chanting, the reading, and the meditating with the body. And sometimes the meditation is done. There's all kinds of meditations you can do, but I find it very helpful when I'm around a dead body. One of the things what I tend to do is 2 meditations. I do loving kindness meditation, and I do choiceless awareness meditation. And choiceless awareness is it's kind of like choiceless awareness is the awareness where you're not choosing any particular place to concentrate your mind, but you're open freely to be attentive to whatever comes to your door, your sense doors, any sense doors. And to me, it seems very appropriate to do that after a person's passed away, because I'm kind of like, making myself an open receptacle to receive whatever might be there still, the presence of the person, the communication, the sense, the intuitive sense of what's happening in the room, the sense of what's happening with the people who are still there. It seems appropriate to have this choiceless awareness. I'm kind of just tuning in. And sometimes I'll do this meditation without closing my eyes, because it seems very part of it then is keeping the eyes open. Because sometimes I'll just kind of be there and kind of just do this meditation where kind of part of it is kind of just looking around the room, kind of taking it in. Because I have some feeling, I'm just taking what's there with all my senses and trying to tune in the best I can. And from my own sense, with the idea that the more that I can be in a state of non-clinging, and at the same time this choiceless awareness is tuning in to what's there, that is helpful for the overall environment. That's helpful hopefully also for the person who's passed away, to somehow that there's a resonance that might be there. So if I get invited to someone's home, to one of your homes, because one of your people has died, and it seems like this is what's it's appropriate to do, this is one of the things you can expect me to do. Is I'll probably sit there for a while very quietly and just be with what's there. Yes, please.
You said you did a loving kindness meditation.
Yeah.
So can you kind of give a little flavor of what phrase you would use, and is it towards the departed person? Is it towards the people who are left behind, or both?
Usually it's mostly to the person who's departed at that point.
And what kind of phrases would you use?
Usually the normal phrases. I mean, sometimes, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy. The person's, somewhere, in wherever you are. May you be, and at ease. And sometimes I might use kind of just spontaneous things that might arise. So then the question is, so there's various things that are done with the body. Keeping it for a while. Some people don't want that, don't feel comfortable with it, and it's fine to get the mortuary service to come and get the body right away then in that case. Or there's other services. I have a kind of I suppose it's a bias, to be honest. But a bias that, I have a bias that the Buddhist way is that all the stuff should happen as simply as possible. So not elaborate funerals, not elaborate memorial services, not elaborate caskets, and not elaborate, that it should be simple, kind of straightforward, and kind of like, Quaker style maybe. I imagine Quakers are simple and down to earth, and that's my bias. And there's no particular reason for that, and beyond my own view of the spiritual life. And certainly lots of Buddhists will have quite elaborate funerals. But I think the idea of doing simply, and so learning a little bit how to do that, learning you don't have to use a mortuary service at all, for example, and learning how you don't have to, you can really get the cheapest possible casket. You can actually get a coffin. You can get cardboard. That's legal. They have cardboard coffins there. It's the cheapest things you can get. There's a general assumption, a view that the Buddhist way of handling the body is to cremate it. And I think that's because it's very common in some Buddhist cultures to cremate a body. But it's not. There's no particular Buddhist thing to do at this point. There are plenty of Buddhists around the world who bury their dead. There's plenty of Buddhists who, probably the majority, burn, I suppose. But there's also what's called sky burials, where I can say it in Tibet, I haven't heard of it anywhere else, but they leave the body up on the cliff tops to be eaten by the vultures. And the water burials, where you just throw the body into the water, and which I guess there's no water bodies here you can do that in, but in the Ganges you can do that. And if you go out in Varanasi in a boat, you have these bodies that float by. And so it's really up to you, or if the person said their wishes before they die, then honor those wishes. If they haven't said what their wishes are, then you have to kind of guess what their wishes are, guess what seems appropriate for you and your family or whatever. But generally Buddhists tend to think of cremation. It tends to be cheaper overall, and it tends to be simpler, and it tends to, for the most part, be more ecological than the kind of funeral home, cemetery kind of approach, where they have lawns. And, yes?
On a practical note, when my aunt passed away 2 years ago, this was my first real time directly dealing with someone dying. And she had contracted with a mortuary service. And what I learned from that is that the law was that they have to, if the body isn't, I forget when they preserve it, what they do. If that isn't done, the body has to be cremated within 24 hours or something like that. There were some laws that they started, reading to us, and it just seemed so inappropriate.
Yeah.
Some of the things that were required by state law, and I wondered what you knew about that. And the reason I'm asking is because you're saying, the different types of, around the world, the different types of ways of dealing with the body. And I'm wondering, within the different types, what is allowed in our...
Legally.
Yeah.
It depends on the state, as far as I understand. Different states, all the different counties have different regulations around this. But in San Mateo County, there doesn't seem to be any limit, as far as I could tell. I'm talking to the people involved, of how long you can keep the body at home, short of becoming a health hazard. And sometimes I've been told that some of the neighbors sometimes will put pressure because the neighbors get nervous about having a dead body more than a couple of days or a day or something. But I think there's a lot of leeway. Funeral homes and mortuary services are notorious for saying the things that would help business. Putting spin on things. And there are non-profit mortuary memorial associations that will help people know what their rights are, what's possible, and how to get the best deal and things like that. But it's very hard when everybody's kind of grieving. So, they have you kind of in a vulnerable time. But you should be very careful when you talk to these mortuary services that you're really getting the straight story. And the only reason you're only legally required to embalm a body if it's going to cross state lines. And in terms of leaving it I never heard that 24-hour rule anywhere. Also, yes, maybe. Sorry.
There is no such thing as a 24-hour rule in California.
Yeah. Yes, I never.
If you go to Neptune and you happen to die on Thursday or Friday, they don't ship out to where they're going to do their cremations until Tuesday or Wednesday.
So they have to keep.
About 2 or 3 times a week.
So you either keep the body at home or you have to send it to a mortuary service for a while.
Pardon me?
So you either keep the body at home or you have to send it to a funeral home to hold it, or the morgue or something.
Again, those that go to Neptune, the pickup is usually from the home to Neptune directly, and very rarely is there a showing. There can be.
Right.
But that's up to the individual.
Right.
And then they may have a service or may not have a service after the fact in terms of having the ashes given back to them. Again, there's a number of options there.
And so,
There are no timelines.
right, that's my understanding. And so if this happens, the place to call, San Mateo County, the people to call is the office or Department of Vital Statistics. And they're the ones who know all the regulations and what you can do. And they're the ones who can issue permits for the various things that you can get permission to do. In order to transport a body, you need to get a permit. But you can get a body and just, put it in your back seat and front seat, I guess. And, carpooling. as long as you have a permit.
Just want to add a little bit of.
Yes, please.
There, and that is that you can't drive in the diamond line.
You cannot, because it's not a person anymore.
That's right.
And who's ruled that?
Pardon me?
Who's ruled that? Has it been ruled that way, or is it?
Yeah, I can tell you that you can.
So, yes.
Well, when you had the cremation, could we back up a little bit? I know we touched briefly prior sessions on organ donation and my
Yes.
the body would have to disappear practically.
Yeah.
And I find myself personally quite torn between wanting to be a blessing by donating and wanting to give the family the sort of peaceful, quiet time. So what's it like when the body just gets whisked out, and how can you create a quiet space for them?
I don't have any experience with that, so I don't know what to say about that. So there are some Asian Buddhists who have strong feelings about not having the body cut up, or not having certain ideas about how, like Tibetan Buddhists to say, you shouldn't have the organs taken out prior to doing a certain transfer of consciousness ceremony they do. After that, you can do whatever you want because consciousness has been transferred. There are different views about it. The view that that particular Theravadan view that's pretty instantaneous, and then it's off to the next life. You can just do it right for the body's, for the person's sake. You can then do the organ donation right away. My own kind of understanding or view about this, kind of my own logic of how this works, is that if there is kind of this process of death and rebirth and the intermediate time of consciousness before the rebirth happens, the person might be aware of the fact that their body is being disturbed and cut up, but that it's such a wonderful thing. It's such a phenomenally beautiful, wholesome thing to do, to donate one's organs. It's so helpful that if that's what the person's wishes are, the benefits that come to oneself through the merit, are greater than the disadvantages of being disturbed. And so if that's what a person's wishes are, go ahead and do it. And then probably you need to follow the doctor's orders the best you can. And then tell the doctors that you would have a great value in trying to make a peaceful environment, quiet as you can, and what are the parameters that you're allowed to do. And I really don't know much about this. I've never had an experience with it. So you have to kind of feel your way. Yes?
Because I didn't grow up in this culture at all. I never had experience of anybody dying here. I don't know if it's true for everybody, but if anybody knows any information on, so if you or do organ donation, where would your body go? And do you have a choice of particular location you can go? Secondly, some of the places you mentioned which will give you kind of a non-profit, advice on quick cremations, or any institution that you said you want to talk to people concerned. If you can mention some of the resources, would be really useful.
Yeah. What I'll do, I'm putting together a manual for a lot of this information, and then in that manual will be all kinds of references to things. So you have to be a little bit patient. Hold off with your dying until you get the manual.
Yeah, I missed the last one, so
Yeah.
you may have
No. And my mind's kind of blank. What was the first half of your question? The first thing you asked?
like an organ donation.
Yeah. Oh, where it can go? So again, I don't know so much about this. It's a little bit hard to actually have the organ donation happen because you have to be in good condition. So if it's usually, I think it's kind of usually if you're brain dead or you really don't have much chance to living, but you're at the hospital, that works best. If you die at home, it's probably they're not going to get you to the hospital quickly enough. Unless there's other things to do, other ways of donating your body besides organ donations. There's also donating your body for medical purposes or scientific purposes, and then you might end up in the anatomy lab, or for studies by students, so the medical students can really learn and be trained, and that's quite a useful thing to do too. And then probably that's probably a whole different scenario than how that's done. And I don't know if this is true, but I was told when I was growing up that a friend of the family's had a tattoo on the sole of her foot that said, "Property of UCLA." Because she was, so it sounds really bizarre to me, but maybe that, my son believes that I grew up in the old days. So, back in the old days, things were different. Yeah.
Bruce's mom gave her body to be studied at Stanford, and all it was, you had to get a form filled out ahead of time that she had to sign, and then they just, you just call them.
Yes, sir. So certainly, the people who are going to survive you, it's really good if they know. If they don't know, then it's hard to have your wishes fulfilled. So okay, that's my take on this. Is that satisfying enough? My answer to you about?
My understanding is it's a very haphazard thing. The state of California a couple of years ago wrote a law in which they gave everybody a form on the back of their driver's license. But that is a hit or miss thing. It depends on where you are and whether you got your driver's license with you or not, and whether even anybody bothers to deal with your driver's license.
Right.
And the whole organ transplant donor thing is actually quite a bit considerably more disorganized than anybody believes. It's actually a matter of serious luck. Anybody gets an organ, as near as I can tell. And it has been for a very long time, because I used to have a friend who worked at the Northern California Transplant Bank, and his take on it then, which was 15, 20 years ago, it was the same
My sister got her kidney last spring, and it came from Boston. That's where they found a good match. She waited. She was on the kidney transplant list for, I think, 4 years. And she'd been told she'd be on it for 2 to 3 years, in the 4 years. And now I think it's probably 5 or 6 years on the waiting list. And there's a great need for it. And the whole issue of organ transplant's a big, really important one. And Bruce, you had
I was just going to say the anatomy instructor, or whatever he was, he called. I got to talk to him, so to find out what they were going to do, and he said they were going to do a new heart procedure, to study a new heart procedure. So.
Great.
But they also wanted to know, what the condition of the body was. They wanted to know. If the person died of an infectious disease,
sure.
If they had certain things, so they might be. I assume they might be picky.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, his mother, who was donated to Stanford, he asked what they were going to use it for, and he was told to do a trial kind of heart procedure, kind of learn how to do it, new procedure, and. But that they're kind of picky about the bodies they will take because they're worried about infectious diseases and other things. So they'll ask you all kinds of questions. So it's kind of hit or miss whether they'll take you, even if you've offered. Yes?
On that same note, I don't know too much about organ transplants, but what I've heard is that there's a question, many people question, is the person really dead? Because they have to take the point, for some of the organs, the point at which they have to take
right.
the organ is so close to the time, and
right.
that's always concerned me. So, and I know you mentioned before, saying, well, what is, the question is, what is the point of death? I guess that's I'm not sure where the question is in that, except to say that, that concerns me.
Sure. Again, it's what I said earlier. My view on this, there's no authority, that ultimately can answer this, I think. But my view is that if it's the person's wish to have their organs donated, and it's such a powerfully beneficial thing to do, it's such a wholesome thing to do, that even if the person's still somewhat alive, to have their organs, what a great way to go. It's such a wonderful thing to do. It hopefully makes the person really happy to know, oh yes, I'm going now, but this is my last thing I'm going to do while I'm still alive. I'm donating my organs.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So my sense is not, if that's the person's wishes, just go for it. And don't worry about this thing, well, the person's not really quite dead yet, or the Buddhists say it's, not really dead for, 3 days, I don't know, Just, if the person's still alive, then they get more benefit from it. They get maybe be aware of that, what great thing they've done. And maybe they can die. The important thing in Buddhism is try to die with as good a state of mind as possible. And my hope is that if the person's heartfelt wish is to donate the organs, that's going to make their mind really good state. Wow, yes, I'm happy. What a great thing to have done. And whereas if you don't do it, and that's the person's wish, and say, they're going to go out. Those people, they didn't get around. They might have a little bit of regret. So I think you just go for it and don't worry about, these kinds of details. That's my take. So a couple of things, brief things about funerals and memorial services. Kind of repeating myself is, you want to design in such a way that's helpful for everyone. But one of the customs that I know of in Buddhism is even if the memorial service is a week later or whatever, is it's very helpful to speak to the person. Not everyone has to. Maybe just the officiant, maybe 1 or 2 family members. But it's very powerful, whether they actually communicate to the person or whether it's just for one's own psyche. It's very powerful to actually speak to the person and say what needs to be said. And, even if it's not necessarily nice things, because you're angry. Let me just, let me tell you about this, I miss you, I'm sorry, I love you, but I got to tell you, when you did that to me, I never told you how much it really hurt or whatever. And so speaking to a person is very powerful to do that. I think it's very helpful. And then to do some of these things, do refuge, do precepts. If the whole audience, everyone there is kind of in the kind of Buddhist world enough, everyone can chant the precepts and refuges together and do some of these chants together. If most of the people there are not in that flow, in that tradition, then if I'm invited in, then I can do it. I'll just do it for the person. And dedication of merit. And there's various things that can happen in a funeral. Sometimes there's a little Dharma talk that's given. Of course, there's kind of usual things, kind of like a eulogy. I tend to, I'm fond of having people, kind of Quaker style, people in the audience freely be able to stand and speak whatever they want to say, rather than have it all organized ahead of time where, you know who's going to speak and it's all, but have some spontaneity to it and see who wants to speak, what needs to be said. And let it kind of have a life of its own, part of it. There's also some ritual things that I'm running out of time now, but a few ritual things that are done with thread and again with water and candles. And so just know that there are all kinds of ritual things that can be done and have symbolic value for a funeral memorial service. One of the things I wanted to talk about today, and we're running out of time now, is some of the ethical issues. For example, mostly euthanasia, but also suicide. Because this is a question that comes up around when someone's terminally ill and suffering a lot. What do Buddhists feel about the person committing suicide? Or euthanasia, where you somehow help the person. Euthanasia literally means good death. So help the person have a good death through passively kind of letting them, just not feeding them or not pulling them off life support, or more actively killing them. Mercy killing, it's called. It's a difficult topic to talk about again because it reflects people's deepest understandings and views about what it means to be a human being and what happens after a person dies. And so for someone to come and impose even Buddhist ideas on that can be tricky, So, because it's a very, very deep kind of area in people's lives. However, probably the key Buddhist teaching that relates to all this question has to do with, is the basic Buddhist teaching having to do with the intentions that are the impulse, the cause, or the condition for which we do things. What's the quality of our intentions when we do something? If the intention is motivated by greed, hate, or delusion, then it's very clear in Theravada and Buddhism, then it becomes an inappropriate action that should not be done. If it's motivated by the opposite, love, wisdom, generosity, then it's considered to be ethically beneficial, because the measurement is, based on people's intentions. The problem with that is that are there circumstances where you might judge the greater good is going to come by following through on my unwholesome intention. So, for example, if you hate, the classic example is if you hate some great king who's going around murdering everybody, or there's a king who's murdering everybody in their kingdom, and you have the chance to kill that king. And it's understood you can't kill someone like that unless there is some aversion in your heart. An aversion, if you kill someone, you create tremendously bad karma for yourself. It's morally unwholesome. But someone might evaluate and say, I'm willing to take on the bad that comes to me, the bad karma, the bad intention, all that, that comes from that, because there's so much greater good that comes from saving all these people's lives. So there's those kinds of equations that go on. But that kind of logic is for the most part absent in Theravadan Buddhism, for better or for worse. Mahayana Buddhism tends to have more of a gray area, where you kind of getting a sense of what's the greatest good here. Whereas Theravadan Buddhism tends to be much more black and white, that it's very clear that if you have an intention of greed, hate, and delusion in your heart, then that's a morally unacceptable action to do. And the Theravadan view is that in order to commit euthanasia, in order to actually do an act that causes a person to die, as opposed to passive approaches, letting the person, nature take its course, that act, the claim is that in Theravadan Buddhism is that there has to be some aversion present for a person to push the button. Even though 99% of the motivation is out of compassion, when we really come down there, the argument is there's some aversion there, and therefore it's unacceptable. It's not an appropriate thing to do. Also, there's a tremendous amount of sanctity in life in Buddhism. And life is considered very precious, and the karmic unfolding and the spiritual process of any living being is considered very, very special, very precious, very sacred, and that to interrupt it by killing it, or killing yourself, is said to cause great harm and is morally inappropriate for Buddhists to do. So, any kind of helping someone commit suicide is actually considered inappropriate also. Anything that helps someone else to die, anything that encourages someone else to die, because it's a really good idea if you die now, is inappropriate. Any kind of bringing it up, say, oh, by the way, have you thought about, not eating now and dying? Any kind of encouragement like that is considered unethical in Theravadan Buddhism.
Even if a person is considered brain dead?
Right.
That's still considered?
Yeah. To say, so yeah. And but then the question is, what do you do if the person's wishes are, if I'm brain dead, I'd like to be, all life support be taken away. If that's their wishes, then how do you negotiate between those two, the wishes and what your tradition says is ethical or unethical? Now, suicide in Buddhism is considered, for the most part, to be unethical. Because killing oneself is the same as killing someone else. Because self and other are not so different. It's like you're killing a human being. But also the logic that is probably behind most suicides is that things will get better. Or maybe not better, at least my suffering is going to stop. Because this is intolerable, the suffering I have now. And it'll end when I commit suicide. This puts an end to it. And with a Buddhist view of rebirth, there's no guarantee that's the case. And in fact, you're setting up the conditions for things to get worse. Because it's such an unethical thing such bad karma to kill yourself. The chances are that you're making things a lot worse for yourself than it is now. So it's not the equation doesn't work in your favor. Even though you might, on the surface it might seem that way. If you don't believe in rebirth, then there's two other arguments against it along these kinds of lines. One is that the process of what happens in the last moments of death. People sometimes recollect their whole lives in just like an instant when they're about to have a car accident or something. A whole lifetime can kind of be lived in a few moments of consciousness. And who knows what the karmic pain that you're going to have to go through if you commit suicide, because of the karma of that, in those last few moments. And you might think, well, 2 moments, that's like nothing. I can live with that. But, it's all this becomes quite relative in those last moments when time seems has a whole different dimension to it. So you don't know what you're doing in suicide. And then and also a very important argument against it is what it does to the people who are left behind. And it causes tremendous distress and suffering for people left behind. And indirectly, their suffering is going to come back and haunt you either in future lifetimes or in those closing moments. My belief, which I don't have any real basis to prove this, but my belief is that some of these things, that the dying process involves really a dramatic facing of your karma. And so rather than thinking you're becoming free of these things, again, the distress that you're causing other people will dawn on you at that moment, or somehow, and it could be quite difficult. So it's kind of, bad news for those people who are thinking about suicide. But it's good news in some ways because it encourages people to find other ways to do it. Part of the argument in Buddhism is that as long as there's life, there's always the opportunity for spiritual purification and transformation. And that suffering is one of the vehicles for that to happen. And so you don't have to be so afraid of your suffering or try to avoid it at all costs. Yeah.
So where's the line between not intervening? Someone's dying and they could be kept alive on life support.
Right.
And by taking no action, how much action is that by choosing to let somebody die?
Good question. So but there are a couple of circumstances where suicide is considered ethically okay or neutral or something. One is a very strange provision that says that if you're engaged in your meditation, and you're really engaged and you're going for some deep realization experience in meditation, and you decide to forgo eating because you're so engaged, and then you die because you forgot to eat, you didn't eat, then it's okay. It's kind of like suicide because you're going for it. You're just going for enlightenment. And then if you die because you didn't eat, then it's okay. Another is that if you have a terminal illness and you're going to die, you're about to die anyway, you're going to die soon enough anyway, and out of compassion for the people who are taking care of you, for the amount of difficulty and problems you're causing for them, it can be okay then to not to kill yourself, but to stop eating and let nature take its course. That's an argument that's made. And the last one is that if you have a terminal illness and you're going to die anyway, and you've already been enlightened, then it's okay just to stop. Because there's no more work to be done then, right? So in terms of needing to hang in there as long as you can to do whatever processing can be done, you don't need to anymore. So you just kind of let yourself go. So what about caring for someone else? And what about decisions around helping them die? My sense is that a Buddhist never wants to encourage it, never wants to be the first one to bring it up. But what if they bring it up? What do you do then? I think this is a very deep thing that each person's have to kind of figure out for themselves in the context of each situation. But in my understanding of what I've read, what I understand from teachers and stuff in the Theravadan tradition, doing anything that kills a person is ethically unacceptable. Doing something where the person simply allows the person to let nature take its course. So removing life support, for example. If moving life support lets nature take its course, is acceptable if the intention is one of compassion. If it's simply like, I've been dealing with this person now for 7 years, and I can't take it anymore, and let's just pull the plug. That is not acceptable. So you have to also have a sense that this is the wishes of the person. They have to convey it in some way. And it's very difficult to use. You have to be very careful in using the justification of compassion as a reason why you're going to help someone to die peacefully, so-called peacefully. And that is that the three sources of bad karma are greed, hate, and delusion. And there can be delusion infused with compassion. So you have to be very careful that there's no delusion going on at this time also. So the tendency in Theravada Buddhism is to be very careful about the moral quality, the ethical quality of these kinds of acts, and to be very, very careful so not to create this very atrociously bad karma of somehow being responsible for someone else's death. Yeah.
One of the things that is not unusual for hospice workers to suggest, at least they did when my friend was dying, is they asked us to encourage our friend to let go and give him permission.
Oh yeah. That's beautiful, because that's what they have to do. That's what's happening anyway.
Yeah.
And so that's part of, if I go to sit with someone who's dying, at some point I'll be doing letting go meditations with them, encouraging them. And also this thing of giving permission to go. But that's not wishing them to die. It's just like there's this process going on, and you can feel them holding on. And they're suffering because they're holding on. And so you're not really encouraging them to maybe die. You're encouraging them to not suffer and to let that process happen. Smita.
I can imagine at a time of a loved one is on life support system, would be very hard. I mean, I'm just thinking of myself, it would be a very hard time for me to sit and come to understanding what my real intentions are. And if it is delusional, I mean, it's hard enough sitting on this chair right now. I mean, what my intentions are, but at that time it would be very hard. If the person has given permission, within my household many of us have, about not continuing on life support system, then even then do I still have to go over that step of seeing what my intentions are, or if that person has given permission and has written very specifically, then as the nearest one, so far the hospital is concerned, am I allowed to give permission without really coming to terms with that?
You have to be always careful with your intention. And sometimes the intentions are mixed, and sometimes they're kind of vague what our intentions are. But you want to be very careful as you can, and then kind of find your way. And so your intention is not mixed with greed, hate, and delusion.
So never mind what the person said. I still.
Well, if you're responsible, if you're going to be responsible for that person dying.
Yeah, the person said very clearly, wrote down, do not continue me on life support. Do I still give them the permission to pull the plug, even though part of me is going to find it convenient, and part of me is going to be sad? And I'm sure there's nobody in my life for whom I would have that way, for whom I will not be sad. But
what do we do when our intentions are mixed, which sometimes they can be? 90% one way, and 90% pure and 10% impure. And what do we do then? These are very difficult questions. I'm very uncomfortable, saying anything almost about these things, and even in saying, when I say things like the traditional Buddhist view is this, I'm being very careful to say, that I'm not trying to say this is what the truth is, because I don't really know some of these things, but they're very difficult issues. But some of the main thing that we're trying to look at, Buddhism is suggesting, is look at the quality of the intention, and look at the sacredness of life, and Buddhism teaches that people have their own karma to work through, and you don't want to interrupt that karma. And also they have their own spiritual process that they're going through. And as long as the person is a human being, and there's some kind of consciousness still going on, there's a possibility that they can work through. And there are lots of experiences of people in comas who seemingly are unconscious, but you come up next to them and you speak to them, and they seem to hear and register at some level. So some processing going on there. And who are you to know? Who are you to know what is really going on for that person? So the tendency in Buddhism is to be very respectful of that person's own karma and abilities, and it's considered extremely rare to be a human being. And the opportunity in human form is so great that you don't want to interrupt that, and just try to preserve it as much as you can. But then the question is, what about when it's a person suffering a lot? Sometimes medical interventions means a person will suffer more. One of the interesting questions is, so Buddhism puts a tremendous value on having a positive, wholesome state of mind as you're dying. So is it better to die in a wholesome state of mind earlier, or to die with morphine-induced, stupor or, nausea or, some medical interventions will keep you going, but the quality of your life is going to deteriorate. It may be better just to, not to have the medical interventions and just let yourself die in a kind of, where your mind is still clear and kind of be present for it in a way. So a lot of it depends on the kind of medication, what the effect it's going to have on you, and, the balance of how much suffering things are going to cause or not cause. And I find these questions very hard. And maybe if I had a lot more experience with them, I had very, 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 almost no experience with these kinds of directly. So I don't really have the experience to give to talk as if someone who's actually grappled with these things myself. I'm aware of these things. I've talked to people about it indirectly, and read about them and things like that. But I find it very difficult. And I wish I could be more, cogent about it. And as I was thinking about this week, talking about this, I was very acutely aware of how this really, the delicacy of talking about this, because it really points to really core views that people have about what it is to be a human being, what religious life is all about, what life and death is all about, and this very deep area that in people's lives, and then how do we talk about that with authority?
We've concentrated on older people dying, but at work, one of my coworkers just had her baby die after 3 days.
After 3 days?
Areas,
Yeah, in the local paper there was. I looked at the police blotter last week, and it said that the fire department or something came to some house someplace because there was a report that a 6-day-old baby had stopped breathing. So there's various things. I mean, there's a Buddhist idea which some Buddhists find a lot of solace in, is that it's the working of karma. And so, it's the karma, the fact that someone dies after a few days as a child. That's the karma of that person to have that kind of life. But that's a little bit simplistic, because the Buddha himself said that the karma is not the only reason why someone might die. There are non-karmic causes to people dying. Illness, for example, that doesn't seem to have a karmic source. But I don't know what to say.
You say the Buddha said illness doesn't have a karmic source?
It doesn't have to. There are non-karmic sources sources of illness and death.
Is there a way to determine?
Well, I left that manual at home.
Information with karma is then becoming very confusing. I mean, if you're a doctor, are you supposed to help and heal people, or let them live and die through their karma? I mean, it's confusing.
Uh-huh. Well, it's their karma to get born in a circumstance where they have access to doctors. So, doctors do what they can. I think that healing is never, as far as I know, I've never seen anybody suggest that the doctrine of karma implies you should not help someone heal.
And with all kinds of acts of helping, too.
Right.
I mean, normally one would think that it is good to help to the extent you can.
Yeah.
But then should you stay away from helping somebody because you're interfering with their karma, and they will be reborn and have to live through the whole experience again?
No, the thing about interfering with someone's karma is that I know about is this thing about death. To help someone die prematurely is to interrupt the working of their karma in this lifetime. That's the specific teaching on that. in other circumstances, I mean, we're supposed to be as helpful as we can to each other. I'll stay and answer a few more questions, but people are beginning to go. It's late. But I wanted to end with this point. So this topic of death and dying has a lot to do with, for a lot of people, with notions of karma or what happens after we die and all this. My personal view is that I don't know what's the truth or about some of these things, but what I do have a tremendous amount of confidence in, so much so I feel like it's enough. You don't need to know anything else. And that is the tremendous power of being fully present for what's happening right now. And that fully present means present in such a way that you're finding your way, or you work your way, you practice your way to being fully present without any greed, hate, and delusion. So the practice of presence is what is significant, is phenomenally significant in all these circumstances. To bring our presence to someone who's dying, to bring presence to our death, to bring a sense of presence to what's happened, the period after someone has died. That these kinds of questions, that what happens and after death, and a lot of these questions are secondary to the importance of really bringing presence to what's happening there. I know that doesn't answer some of the questions around euthanasia, and I think that euthanasia is such a difficult one that each person's going to really have to search their own hearts to find out what seems most appropriate, and each situation is probably different from every other one, so it's also situational. But I hope that your Dharma practice, your mindfulness practice, is teaching you the skills and the value, the faith in the importance of being present now, and then doing again for the next now, and then for the next now. And someday, the next now will be your last breath. It's just another now. And then what happens after that? It's just another now. So, cultivate your presence and share your presence with the people that you love. So those are my thoughts, and I'll stay if you have more questions. And I hope this 3-day class has been useful. And it certainly stimulated me a lot in terms of thinking about a lot of these things, about how it might be useful for our Sangha. And I have a lot more to pass on. And I think that it'll have to take the form of this manual that I'm putting together. And someday I'll let you know. If you don't come to our Sangha on any kind of regular basis or at all, except for this, if you want to know about this manual, you can contact us in 6 months or so and see if it's been done by then. Okay? Thank you.